Recent studies have shown that every generation is less empathetic than the last, with the latest generation, Gen Z, showing the biggest drop in empathy scores. But what is empathy, and why does it matter, and what do books have to do with any of it? When you hear someone talking about empathy, you usually hear them talk about its importance. They say that it allows you to see the world from other people's perspectives. Empathy is helpful in relating to people, inspiring them to take action, and much more. But there's more that we should talk about before writing off empathy as pure good. People often like to exploit your empathy, whether this is for the greater good, like Huckleberry Finn's impact on slavery, or for bad, like the mainstream media and politicians exploiting your empathy in promise to make the world a better place. Literature is important to empathy, just like how empathy is important to literature. These two things work together to convey ideas and truths to the reader. Oftentimes, the best literature forces you to empathize with the character so you become emotionally invested in the story and derive some sort of meaning or moral from it. Do less empathetic people dislike literature? Literature is something that forces you to be empathetic, so it would only make sense that less empathetic people are less fond of literature, and possibly even art in general. Surely this cannot be the case. Many people I know who scored low on the empathy quotient test love to read even more than those who scored high on the test. Clearly, literature is for everyone, whether less empathetic or more. One importance of literature is its effect on your empathy. According to Discover magazine, reading increases your empathy. In 2014, a study was conducted on elementary and high school students. This study concluded that after reading Harry Potter, the youth was more empathetic towards immigrants, refugees, gay and lesbian people. This study shows that reading increases your empathy. If sympathy exists, why does empathy matter? Sympathy is the ability to rationally understand what a person is going through and how it might be hard for them. So if we have this thing, sympathy, why is empathy important? Well, there are three different components of empathy: emotional, compassionate, and cognitive. Emotional empathy is physically feeling someone else's emotions alongside them. If you've ever cringed while watching someone get hurt or cried at a wedding, you've experienced emotional empathy. Compassionate empathy is feeling a call to help someone in need. If you've ever watched an advertisement for an animal abuse relief charity and wanted to help or donate, you've experienced compassionate empathy. Finally, we have cognitive empathy. Cognitive empathy is understanding how someone would feel. It's putting yourself in someone else's shoes and taking on their perspective. Cognitive empathy sounds a lot like sympathy though, doesn't it? That's because it is. This all goes to show that sympathy is an integral part of empathy. Sometimes we don't know how to feel about things. Take a look at Emily in A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. Emily was raised by a very controlling father who didn't let Emily express romantic interest in boys. Because of this lack of expression, when Emily finally got a partner, she became overly attached. Because of this extreme attachment to her partner, she killed him when he wanted to leave. Are Emily's actions excusable? No, the murdering of her husband was a morally bad decision. But do we empathize with her? I would say we do. Emily is a product of her environment, a monster her father created. This all goes to show that empathy is not as simple as I feel bad for you or I don't feel bad for you. There's a lot of gray area. An even more confusing example comes from A Perfect Day for Banana Fish by J.D. Salinger. Throughout the story, Seymour Glass, a World War II veteran, is accompanied by a little girl, Sybil, while he lounges on the beach. He acts very nice to Sybil until he suddenly kisses the arch of her foot. This sudden act of twisted affection throws the reader through a loop, trying to figure out the intent behind Seymour's predatory behavior. Up until the kiss, we look at Seymour as someone who's likely experienced lots of trauma in the war, but after that we think that Seymour is a creep, and we no longer empathize with him. These are two examples of one of the importances of literature. This ability to paint a morally challenging picture forces the audience to exercise their cognitive empathy and emotional empathy skills. This allows us to broaden our perspectives on the world and think about how our actions may affect others before we make a rash decision and hurt somebody. Literature can also be used to change things. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman is an attempt to highlight the counterproductivity of the rest cure, a once popular treatment for mental conditions among women. The rest cure was prescribed to Gilman in an attempt to cure her of her mental condition. The Yellow Wallpaper follows Jane, a writer, as she's been prescribed a rest cure to help with her temporary nervous depression and slight hysterical tendency, a misdiagnosis of postpartum depression. In the story, Jane slowly drifts further and further into madness due to the rest cure she was prescribed. Even though Gilman's story wasn't massively influential the way stories like Adventures of Huckleberry Finn or Uncle Tom's Cabin were, the story was able to save at least one person from the rest cure and convince the physician who prescribed Gilman's rest cure to modify his treatment of the condition that Gilman had. When Gilman wrote The Yellow Wallpaper, she attempted to appeal to the compassionate aspect of empathy. Gilman voiced her hatred for the rest cure and wrote a story detailing its terrible effects to try and get the readers to take action against the rest cure. There are lessons in many stories. Authors usually write because they want to convey some sort of moral or share an insight they found. The Lottery, despite being open to many interpretations, is a great example of this. Whether you choose to interpret it as a critique of the military draft, a critique of tradition, or as a pseudo-autobiography, one thing stays the same. The story exploits your empathy. Shirley Jackson uses your empathy for the girl who is stoned to push a message. This is common all throughout literature. The idea of appealing to the reader's empathy in order to make them think about the story's meaning. All of this is to say that empathy is an important part of literature, and literature is an important part of empathy. By using empathy, we're able to read literature and step into the shoes of someone else. We're able to temporarily live a life separate from our own. So now that you're done taking a walk in my shoes, let's try on some other people's perspectives. Okay, so at the food pantry, it says you can stop in and ask some questions. So I'm gonna see if they... Hi there, do you work with the food pantry?
Yeah, I do. What's up?
Okay, could you help me out with my final really quick? This is just a microphone.
Okay.
Could you define empathy?
Empathy. Let's see. I don't know, just feeling what others, putting yourself in other people's shoes, kind of, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
Like, relating to them. That's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you so much. Can you define empathy?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it means that you are in someone else's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Like you kind of align your feeling, your heart, your intention, like with
Mm-hmm.
what they're going through.
Mm-hmm.
Try to like really come alongside someone.
Yeah. Okay. And then how about, would you consider yourself to be an empathetic person?
With Christ, yes.
With other people, though.
What?
With other people?
No,
would
like
you
I'm
consider-
saying that, like I have God in my life.
Yeah.
And I love the Lord Jesus, and He Himself is the empathetic person.
Okay.
So when I'm with the Lord, contacting other people, yeah, I believe that His empathy is like then, like becomes my empathy.
Okay, so
If
you
that
would
makes
consider
sense.
yourself an empathetic person?
Yes, with
Okay,
Christ. With
okay,
Christ
with
in
Christ.
Christ.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I get it.
Okay.
So, what do you think that it means to be an empathetic person with Christ?
Okay. I think it means just to. Ooh, it's hard. Okay. I think to really listen to someone. Really listen to someone and take the time to get to know them and what kind of they're really going through. And yeah, just consider them. I think consider their situation almost above yourself. And be able to like kind of walk someone through that.
Okay. Do you think that the world needs to be a more empathetic place?
That would be great.
Yeah? Do you think that
Yeah.
empathy is important?
Oh yeah.
Why?
Why? Well, I think we could all use some empathy from other people. I think us ourselves, like, we really treasure when someone is empathetic towards us. And so, certainly, like, if we had that more for others, like, I think we would be a lot better off. Yeah.
Okay. So you think that empathy would just kind of make the world a better place?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
And then do you think that, like, consuming media, whether through, like, books or movies or whatever, has any impact on your empathy?
Books or movies?
Or
something?
movies or just general, like, media or, like, art?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
How do you think that impacts your empathy?
I think it kind of opens my eyes to other people's experiences. If I don't like come in contact with someone like during that day, or like, if I haven't talked to someone physically who has experience like going through like whatever, a fire, a war, bad surgery, then reading about it or watching something about it can maybe open my eyes a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
So would you say that like trauma makes you a more empathetic person?
I think suffering, yeah. Any suffering.
Okay.
Yeah, trauma would be included.
Do you think that we can become more empathetic through happy things?
Not particularly, no.
Okay. Why do you think is it that when we say that we empathize with someone, it's usually something sad? Like if someone gets in like a car crash.
Yeah.
Because you can feel empathy, you can feel like secondhand happiness too, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So why
That's
do
a good point.
So why do you think that when we say I empathize with that person or whatever?
Yeah.
Why do you think that's always like a negative thing?
I just think that's when usually people are in more need of it. I think it's nice to have others to rejoice with you and be happy with you for something, for sure.
Yeah.
But I think it's like kind of, when you're in the darker times is when you really might sense your need for others to be empathized.
Yeah, to have empathy with
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
Okay, thank you.
empathetic person.
All right, that's all. Thank Hey, I remember you. I was told that if I had a question to ask, you would be the guy. This is a microphone. I'm doing a video project on empathy for my final. Could you define for me what empathy is to you?
Empathy?
Yeah. And if you could just come a little closer. You don't have to be in the video if you don't want to.
No, I'm just trying to think of the definition for empathy.
Yeah.
From what?
Empathy. You know what that means?
Give me a second, I'll be right back.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
Having compassion for.
I'm sorry?
Having compassion for.
Having compassion for. That's good.
I have a compassion for. I'm a youth minister, so I have a compassion for
Yeah.
teens.
Yeah.
My teens, high school students, junior high students. Real empathy for those kids and to see how they grow in their faith and in their personalities.
Yeah, that's good. Do you think that you could increase your empathy somehow?
Yeah. Just I can increase it by reaching out to more students, more kids. Maybe their parents and stuff.
Yeah. How important is empathy to you?
Very important.
Very important. Okay. Do you think that you're a very empathetic person?
Yes.
Okay. Do you think that most people are very empathetic?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
You're
You've been a
welcome.
great help.
No problem.
So what does empathy mean to you?
Okay, so empathy would mean that in some measure I can identify with the feelings that another person has, either because I've gone through it or I've gone through something like it, so that when they go through it, I feel the same feelings.
So do you have to go through the same like pain that someone else has gone to in order for you to feel empathetic towards someone?
I would say you don't have to feel identical to that, but in certain measure there's things that I couldn't understand. So like the biochemical pathways between the right and left hemisphere of the brain are severed by testosterone in the womb. So men have different brains than women. So if you told me, what does it feel like to be a woman? I really couldn't tell you because I'm male. So I could kind of, maybe they could reflect and tell me some of their feelings, but I don't think I'll ever understand like childbirth. You know, one woman I talked to once, she said, it's like crapping a pumpkin.
Yeah?
I'm never going to crap a pumpkin.
No,
So,
probably not.
So that level of pain or those kind of things, I don't think. But then there's certain things that are empathetic that are common to both sexes or common to all people, like loss of a pet. If you've lost a pet, you could have very similar feelings. But then if someone lost their father, everybody had a different relationship with their father.
That's true.
So you can't necessarily know exactly how they're feeling. Some people might feel relief because their father's abusive.
Yeah. Okay, so how do you think that empathy is an important trait?
Oh, very much so, yes. And and I think that if were empathy more prescient in like leaders and lawmakers, we'd have better laws. Instead, it seems like they pass laws that superficially they think will make people vote for them.
Yeah.
But they haven't really, many of them haven't, the elites of our country have not been poor. in most cases.
Yeah, most of them.
So they haven't been through those types of experiences. They haven't been in a deprivated environment, or they've been in the halls of power so long that they can't identify. So even on a governmental level, yes, I would say empathy was very important. And I would think for sure, like the cops, if they're guys that grew up local and kind of know, then that would be helpful. Yes, very much so. If you had a professor in school that kind of struggled early on with their coursework and then landed
And then they get
figured
it.
it out, then that would be a much more helpful, possibly, instructor because they could empathize with the fact that you weren't doing as well.
Okay, so you think that empathy makes just the world generally a better place?
I would say that in almost every sphere of human life, it would be helpful.
Okay, and then do you think that you are an empathetic person?
Okay, so I feel like I am, that I have like, they say like an emotional IQ.
Yes.
So I think that I identify well with people and I'm received well by people. But of course you could always be blinded to your own failings, and I certainly have them. But I think on a scale, I'm more empathetic than not. And I think that's part of the reason I'm a poor salesman. Because I always feel like people should think about this. They should process it. They should feel good about it. Whereas a salesman wants you to just like make the decision.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you're more empathetic, you're probably a worse salesman, and I am a bad salesman, so I think that that's like a sign to me that I'm kind of more on the empathetic scale.
Okay, so do you think that there's something that you could do to increase your empathy?
Yes, I think in an area where I don't feel like I can identify as well with people, then I could try and find out a way to like connect better, or to at least experience a little bit more of what they're feeling. When I lived in San Francisco, we'd get up early in the morning on the weekend and we'd go to a kitchen and we'd make oatmeal for like homeless people and stuff. So you get a little bit of a sense of what they were going through. Not really. And then we spent a whole weekend out on the street. We weren't allowed to bring any money or anything. We just crashed down the street. Then you're supposed to panhandle and like trying to feel how that was.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of a sense of it. You can't get it entirely because you knew you were going to go home and shower and things are going to be cool later.
Yeah.
So, but you could have a certain sense about just a little bit of the embarrassment that you had to ask people for money, and stuff like that. So I think you can go and kind of engineer some of those experiences in certain cases, but of course human experience is so varied that the ability to have all of those experiences would be impossible. So there has to be some type of frame of reference where you can sort of identify, like pain sometimes is equal to pain.
Yeah.
If your brother broke up with his girlfriend, you didn't break up with the same kind of girl, but you kind of get it.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think that like consuming narratives, whether like movies, books, whatever, do you think that pays any like importance to empathy?
I think sometimes it does. Sometimes there's too quick of a resolution, though.
Yeah.
And so people get the impression then that when they have conflict, it will automatically resolve itself. So in terms of conflict resolution, I think you can give people a false sense of empathy. But then in certain like very realistic films, like Saving Private Ryan, where you can actually hear the bullets flying by when they hit the coast of Normandy, I think some of those things really do help people much more so identify with some of the realistic fears of possibly someone who was a veteran.
Okay.
And then has some of those things. So I think in some cases media is essential.
So it kind of helps you like relate to someone a little bit better?
Yeah, put yourself in that experience. You're kind of living it. And I think in film they call it, or in plays, the suspension of disbelief. So you get so caught up in it that you don't even, you forget you're not, you forget you're not there. And so when that stuff is well done, I think it does contribute to people's empathy, and it really, I guess sadly, you got guys like Hitler or Stalin, they used propaganda to try and give people a false sense of things as well. It could be detrimental, but I think in a positive sense, certainly it could be very beneficial.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think that society is empathetic, or do you think that they should be more empathetic? Or?
I think in some measure, real genuine empathy has been supplanted by what people just write off as government action.
Yeah.
So instead of actually caring for poor people or trying to help them by donating to a charitable organization, you just think, oh, the government does that. I pay taxes, so fine. So in some measure, I think our society's been removed further away from that because government has taken over charitable roles, and so people don't have a hands-on with that. It's somebody's job to go hand out help to needy people so I don't have to trouble myself with them.
Mhm.
So I think our society's been increasingly removed from that by increased amount of government interaction.
Mhm. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thanks very much for having me.
Hey, this has nothing to do with the video, but I just thought that this was kind of funny. Just spills all over the floor.
5 to 6.